When the leaders were supposed to engage, the opportunity now appears to have slipped away. Mark Carney, the Prime Minister of Canada, is unlikely to find a chance to mend fences with Donald Trump, President of the United States, anytime soon. That is the stark reality this morning as the diplomatic fault lines widen. President Trump has once again made it clear he will not meet with the Canadian Prime Minister to discuss the breakdown in trade negotiations. And Prime Minister Carney confirms he has not reached out either. He stated, "The President and I have not spoken since he took this decision. We are ready to have discussions when the Americans wish to have those discussions. But we don't dictate the timing of that." Carney faced a barrage of questions about the US-Canada trade talks as he wrapped up an international summit in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. Reporters pressed him on whether Canada should continue to reach out to the White House and whether the president is even interested in striking a deal with Canada. Both men are due to attend the upcoming international summit in South Korea later this week. But the tone set by President Trump suggests the two will remain at arm's length. Addressing reporters aboard Air Force One earlier today, President Trump said, whether it's provincial or Canada itself, they all knew exactly what the ad was. You, the Prime Minister, knew. Everybody knew. The Prime Minister knew what the ad was. People are worried about you. You see him in April. Do you want to meet with them? I don't want to meet with them. No, I'm not going to be meeting with them for a while. No, I'm very happy with the deal we have right now with Canada. We're going to let it ride. He added that he would not provide any fresh details on his threat to apply another 10% tariff on Canadian goods. Rafi Boudjikanian, travelling with Prime Minister Carney in Malaysia, reports that this morning's Carney news conference was the first time reporters had been able to ask him questions since Washington ended formal trade talks with Ottawa late last week. In response to questions about the new 10% tariff and his personal contact with the US president, Carney said he has no idea where this additional 10% in tariff hikes could go. We don't have any details on that. He also confirmed he has not spoken to President Trump since the trade talk breakdown. When asked by a reporter whether he had reached out via text or call, given that the Prime Minister's office has previously indicated Carney and Trump may correspond by message, he sidestepped. Instead, he reiterated that he was ready to resume talks when the US side is inclined. Earlier today, the president, en route to Japan, told reporters on Air Force One that he had no interest in speaking to Canada for a very long time, and that he was quite happy with the deal that Canada and the US have right now. When asked, how did your relationship with Donald Trump go south? Carney replied, "You should ask Donald Trump that question." That response, the reporter observed, was telling. Behind the public scenes of protocol and negotiation stands a deeper realignment of Canadian diplomacy. Carney's broader focus during this trip emphasised diversification of Canada's trade beyond the United States. Before the question and answer session, his remarks had centred on his visit to Malaysia and his ambition of concluding a free trade agreement with the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, by the end of next year. He suggested that the uncertainty in the US relationship is yet another reason for Canada to look outward. Carney declared that the old relationship with the US is over. Analysts note that this stance reflects a new era in Canada-US trade ties. Both leaders are expected in South Korea later this week for the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit, APEC. Carney had earlier said, "I look forward to seeing President Trump there, or I'm sure I'll see him there." You might see him there, but it doesn't seem like the two men will speak at all. At the news conference, Carney emphasised that it is the Canadian government, not provincial administrations, that negotiates with the United States on trade. In response to a question about an Ontario-sponsored advertisement airing in the US, he stated in French that Canada had pointedly chosen not to run the ad in the United States, though he did not say explicitly that he requested its removal. In the same session, he revealed that he intends to meet with Xi Jinping, President of the People's Republic of China, while both leaders are in South Korea. That intention had already been signalled by the Prime Minister's office. His public confirmation underscores the importance Ottawa attaches to pursuing alternative trade partners. Trade analysts say this escalating standoff sends a clear strategic message. President Trump remains visibly upset by the Ontario advertisement, which featured a 1987 speech by former US President Ronald Reagan and aired in the United States targeting American viewers. Although Premier Doug Ford's government in Ontario later agreed to stop the campaign, the damage appears to have been done. The president told reporters, "I don't like that. That's dirty pool and you can't do that." They shouldn't have done it. They've apologised and they said, we're going to take the ad down. Well, they did it, but they did it very late. They let it play for another 2 nights and now they took that ad down. So I don't know when it's going to kick in. We'll see, but I don't really want to discuss it. From Canada's perspective, the lack of clarity is striking. It is unclear when or if the 10% tariff will be formally triggered. It is also unclear which goods will be targeted. For instance, whether materials that are non-CUSMA compliant will be hit, or whether this is layered on top of the existing tariffs under President Trump's executive orders. What is clear is that the dispute remains a major irritant for Washington and a high-stakes pressure point for Ottawa. Compounding matters is a looming legal challenge in the United States. Starting on November 5th, the Supreme Court of the United States will hear arguments in 2 linked cases concerning the President's power under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act and related trade tariffs. One key question: does the President have statutory authority to impose broad tariffs on imports under emergency powers? And is that constitutional given Congress's power to legislate on tariffs and taxation? Tariffs have been a cornerstone of Trump's agenda, used as both an economic tool and a negotiating leverage card. Observers say if the court rules against those emergency powers, the impact could reshape trade negotiations with Canada and beyond. The stakes for Ottawa are arguably as high as they get. The dependencies between the 2 economies are deep. The United States remains Canada's largest export market. Nearly 3/4 of Canadian exports go to the US. For Canada, the message is clear. Prime Minister Carney is steering the country toward a more independent posture in global trade. His rhetoric and his actions reinforce the view that Canada can no longer lean on the United States as its economic guarantor. The new government is prioritising diversification of trading partners, especially in Asia and Europe. Carney has framed his approach in blunt terms, that Canada will do business on its own terms. But diversification is a long-haul strategy. The United States remains deeply integrated into Canada's supply chains, with geographic proximity and historical ties creating entrenched trade flows. While Carney's pivot is ambitious, analysts caution that Canada's leverage over the US is modest, given that 3/4 of Canadian exports still go south. Nonetheless, several recent policy moves underscore this shift. The Carney government introduced the One Canadian Economy Act, which aims to remove internal federal trade barriers and accelerate infrastructure investment in Canada. The objective is to strengthen domestic resilience and linkage to global markets. Beyond the US, Carney's administration has also announced protectionist-style measures of its own. Additional tariffs of 25% on steel imports from non-US countries containing Chinese melted steel, for example. And in August, the government announced it would remove many retaliatory tariffs on US goods that fall under the USMCA, also known as CUSMA in Canada, signalling a willingness to de-escalate in targeted sectors while maintaining leverage in others. For President Trump, trade policy continues to serve as both a domestic signal and a foreign policy lever. By rebuffing Canada, threatening further tariffs, and publicly lambasting an Ontario advertisement, the President is broadcasting his unwillingness to be seen as soft on trade partners he deems uncooperative. But by doing so, he is introducing greater uncertainty in bilateral relations. This episode underscores a broader phenomenon. Even long-standing alliances are not immune to abrupt shifts when one side rewrites the rules. In this case, Canada and the United States were once the poster children of seamless border integration. Now, trade is being renegotiated, not just in formal talks, but in press conferences, tariffs, and geopolitical signalling. If the US Supreme Court limits the President's power to unilaterally impose tariffs under emergency authority, the implications will ripple far beyond North America. Already, Canada is preparing its response within the upcoming review of the USMCA. Will the split-second threat of a 10% additional tariff on Canadian goods be formally applied? And if so, when, to what goods, and under what legal basis? As of now, there are no published implementation guidelines. In the upcoming APEC summit in South Korea, will Carney and Trump actually meet? And if they do, will Canada gain any concessions or framework for a new economic and security relationship with the US? How will Canada's push into Southeast Asia and other non-US markets proceed? Carney emphasised before the Q&A the urgency of diversifying trade, and analysts will be watching whether deals with ASEAN countries make real headway. How will Canadian business sectors respond, especially those in steel, aluminium, autos and energy-critical minerals? These industries are most vulnerable to tariff escalation and supply chain disruption. What happens in the US Supreme Court? If the president's tariff authority is deemed unconstitutional, that could create a domino effect in trade law and reset the negotiation dynamic with Canada and other partners. Canada is standing at a crossroads in its trade relationship with its largest and nearest neighbour. Prime Minister Carney's government appears to be moving decisively to recalibrate Canadian diplomacy toward diversification, autonomy and resilience. President Trump, for his part, has hardened his posture, threatened new tariffs, publicly rebuffed Canada's outreach and forced Canada to demonstrate that it can operate beyond the US sphere. The handshake between Ottawa and Washington may still take place at APEC later this week. But given the animus and the unresolved issues, what it will look like or whether it will signify anything more than the photo op remains an open question. For now, Canada is moving toward a different kind of neighbourly diplomacy, and the old natural relationship with the United States has clearly been called into question.